From St. Louis Public Radio, this is St. Louis on the Air. I'm Danny Wysentowski.
They have cut the heart out of KDHX.
Behavior of the staff, the behavior of the board of directors is a mystery.
But we can also celebrate the fact that other people want to join the station and be on the radio.
It's laughable. It's actually laughable. They weren't necessarily all let go for the same reasons.
You know, the irony is that that same accusation has been made and attributed to management at KDHX, meaning Miss Kelly Wells.
This is not Russia. This is St. Louis, America. It's not Vladimir Putin. More representation on the board.
They've never said what the direction is.
And more saying how the station is run.
It's really disheartening to see a community radio station alienate itself from the community they claim to represent.
The radio airwaves are less crowded this week. It's not the number of stations that has changed, but the voices themselves. On Friday, 10 volunteer DJs at the community radio station KDHX 88.1 FM were told they were fired, and for their fans it was a day of shock and loss as they said goodbye to programs that had spent years, even decades, on the air. On Monday, the hits kept coming. In solidarity with our colleagues, 4 volunteer DJs announced their resignations on air, and that included DJ Tim Rakel.
Just a little less than 2 minutes before noon. Thank you, St. Louis. Thank you, everybody out there listening on the internet and the radio. It's been a big part of my life for a long time. And with a broken heart, I am now out on strike.
That was Tim Rakel with a broken heart, signing off and going on strike during his show Mystery Train on Monday morning on KDHX. So what is going on at KDHX? The station has been around since 1987, but its recent years have been rocky. Those includes reports in 2019 of racism and sexual harassment. But these firings, it's left its supporters wondering what comes next. And where does KDHX go from here when some of its most recognizable voices are no longer part of it? This issue is complicated, and it is still unfolding. The station's management is defending its decisions, and we will get to the station's response a little bit later in our program, and we'll also discuss what happened at a meeting just last night of the station's volunteers. So there are a lot of moving pieces, but St. Louis Public Radio's arts and culture reporter Jeremy Goodwin has been covering them, and he joins us now. Jeremy, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Danny.
So, Jeremy, let's start with some basics here. You reported on Friday about KDHX firing its 10 volunteer DJs, or 10 of its volunteer DJs. There's around 80, if I'm understanding. And the station also informed another 12 that they must complete a mediation process if they want to stay on the air. Do we have a clear understanding of why this action was taken on Friday?
The official announcement from the station said that these DJs had basically performed actions that were detrimental to the station, that they'd hurt the reputation of the station. Board President Gary Pearson had said to me more specifically that this was part of an ongoing culture shift where they were putting an enhanced focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and that not everyone is sufficiently committed to that. Now, there's a direct line to Friday's events from earlier this year. The station first dismissed Tom Papa Ray, a longtime DJ, in March from his station, from his show, saying that he had been bullying and harassing behind the scenes, which he denied, and said, actually, I have a right to make criticisms if I wish to. But that sparked a movement among DJs. Many of them started meeting Tuesdays at a VFW post, planning ways to exert more control over the way the station is run. And subsequent to that, 3 other DJs were suspended or removed from the air. The reason given for that was that they had supported, allegedly, a campaign for listeners to withhold their donations. Now, that campaign is out there. There's a Twitter account, KDHX Pledge Strike, where people can learn all about that. But these DJs said, no, we weren't up here telling other people to do that. And Andy Coco, in fact, said, no, you should keep giving your money. So then that brings us to Friday with this new round of people who've been let go.
Wow. So there are a lot of moving pieces with the pledge drive also happening now at the same time.
This week.
And, I know for listeners of KDHX and our own station, you might have opinions on this. And so how if you are listening, please, we're like you to join our conversation. How are you feeling about the changes at KDHX, and what are your hopes for its future? You can give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. You can send us a tweet at STL On Air or email us at stlpr.org. So let's talk a bit more about these firings. We've talked about the firings in our introduction a bit. We've heard from one of the DJs. That'll happen on Friday, but other DJs took it upon themselves to stand with their colleagues. And we'll just have that in just a second. There were a lot of DJs who took this action, and one of those was Ital K.
As I speak to you, I'm standing in a very, very dangerous position. And I know that I've been targeted from day one. So I feel that this is my last show here at 88.1 KDHX. I'm 61 years old, black Rastafari, locks down to my ankles, and I do know right from wrong.
That was now former KDHX DJ Ital K announcing on his show just this past Saturday morning that he was resigning as well. And Ital K is here with us in studio now. Ital, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Blessed greetings and thanks and welcome to you and your audience. Thank you for the invite on behalf of the St. Louis community and KDHX.
So Ital, we just listened to you delivering a resignation on your own show. What brought you to that moment?
The station management brought me to that moment by Friday, without proper proof or explanation. All of the firings that have happened to date have been done without proof or justifiable explanation. 10 in one day. 10 in one day. Let me just read those names here for you just a moment. 10 in one day. This should not have happened. You got people like Michael Kelker, Roy Caston, Rich Reese, Karen House, John Wendland, Paul Stark, Chris Lawyer, Christopher Schwartz, Hound Dog Brown. And there's many others.
And many of these names, I mean, we're talking about years, decades of shows and music of every variety that one could think of.
You're talking over 200 years of brought St. Louis, homegrown St. Louis talent that's here serving the community for over 200 years. And in one move, without proof or explanation, you're cutting the lives of those 10 and more volunteers, their families, their spouses, their families, their friends and their families, and their friends and their families. That is the ripple and devastating effect, which they ignore.
So the DJs that were fired, there were those who were terminated outright, but there was 12, including you, who were not fired, but given this condition that you had to complete a mediation process to avoid being fired. Now, you've taken the step of resigning yourself, but what was that demand? What were they asking of you?
They said to me that in an email that in order for me to continue volunteering at KDHX, I had to complete a mediation, be involved in a mediation between KDHX management and a third-party agency. And they said that meeting would take place after the fund drive. So I don't know when, where, how, or what, or why, or any further details. The communication between management at the station and its volunteers has been very poor.
And Jeremy, you've spoken to a number of DJs in your reporting as this has unfolded. What can you tell us about, what was the station asking of the DJs that it asked about mediation? How did it make that distinction? And I guess I guess to that question, what was the point of that mediation?
Well, I think there weren't a lot of specifics beyond what I just heard was more specific than what I knew previously about the mediation process. But the idea basically been the board is presenting that they're at an impasse right now, that they are trying to lead the station in a certain direction, and that a contingent among the DJs is preventing that from happening. That some of the DJs are, in effect, working against the interests of the station. And they decided that in order to keep them in the fold still, there would have to be some sort of a determination, that a sign-on that, yes, we're all on the same page here, we share the same goals, because it doesn't appear right now that they do all share the same goal.
And Jeremy, in the day that the firings were announced, in the press release that the station put out, they made several references to a report called Sound Diplomacy. Can you tell us of what that program is and how that relates to the decision they'd made on Friday?
Sure. That's something we'll talk more about on the air here. It's a report sponsored by the Krensberg Arts Foundation and Regional Arts Commission that looks at the music ecosystem, the professional music scene in St. Louis, and it includes several specific recommendations about supporting collaboration and enlisting government support to promote local musicians and whatnot. And the station announcement on Friday put these dismissals in the context of a commitment to the principles in sound diplomacy, that we want to be a station that facilitates collaboration among organizations. We want to help move the music scene forward. Now, that had the unintended consequence, I think, of a lot of KDHX fans getting a very bad impression about what sound diplomacy is and having some harsh words about that. And in fact, some of the people who worked on that report and are critical of station management have spoken up since to say, hey, let's separate these two things. That's an interesting report. It's got some recommendations. We should keep talking about them, and let's not have it be, in their view, tainted by its association with these firings.
Right. And, this incident, it's brought so much scrutiny on the structural issues of KDHX, its role in the community. But on the personal level, we've been hearing from a lot of listeners who just feel sad. We heard from John in Bethalto, who wrote, "It has been brutal watching a truly beloved St. Louis institution be dismantled over these past weeks." We also heard from Jen, who wrote to us, "What's surprising to me is how much love I still apparently have for the station. I was not expecting to cry when Tim Rakel resigned, or to feel a gut punch when I learned about Bobby Sweet getting the axe." I tell that what Jen referenced, the fact that listeners have been feeling torn for some time, seeing the station as it tries to reshape itself. What emotions have you been hearing from listeners, and what are they telling you?
They have cut the heart out of KDHX. In a nutshell, they've cut the heart out of KDHX. Just like the quote you just mentioned. People have been in tears, literally in tears. And it's a shame to hear that the community is crying and the station management is not listening.
And the heart of KDHX, what is that to you?
The heart of, it's like your heartbeat. Music, it's my heartbeat. Music, it's our listeners' heartbeat. The volunteers of KDHX, that's our heartbeat. And they have cut that.
We need to take a quick break, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation with St. Louis Public Radio's Jeremy Goodwin and former KDHX DJ Ital K. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome back. I'm Danny Wysentowski. So, Jeremy Goodwin, let's talk about the station's management here and its responses to this ongoing controversy. So after the firings just this past Friday, KDHX board president Gary Pearson told you basically that this was an issue of the DJs not being on board with the station's new direction. And your story quoted him saying, "We need to build the capacity to combat things like racist and gender discrimination and patriarchy and all of these things. And the reality is that these individuals that we're talking about, it's just not consistent with those goals to have them be part of the organization anymore." Now, that statement caused its own controversy, and so Jeremy, has Pearson clarified what he was talking about there? Were these DJs being accused of racism and sexism themselves, or was it something a bit more complicated?
Probably the latter there, a bit more complicated.
More complicated, okay.
I spoke with Gary Pearson this morning, and he said he absolutely stands behind everything that he said to me last week and how I quoted him. He did say, however, that for the people who are no longer volunteers, they weren't necessarily all let go for the same reasons necessarily. So there's sort of a bag of complaints here. There have been the complaints about the pledge strike. There have been there's a lot of friction behind the scenes, maybe some foot dragging when the station management wants to institute a certain new policy. And so all of that together adds up to the bottom line that he said to me is that these are people who are working at cross purposes of the station right now.
Right. And, this statement that he did, initially give, the Post-Dispatch has also kind of created some complication with it. They interviewed him and paraphrased him clarifying his position. They said that that it has not been the case, that he has no reason to think that the fired DJs were racist or sexist. Rather, they were let go because they had been vocal and disruptive of their support of Tom Papa Ray after his release in February. But now he is, this statement. And we heard from Linda in University City, who wrote that she had stopped supporting KDHX after it fired Tom Papa Ray. And she said, I do not buy the statements by KDHX management claiming that recent firings were not retaliatory. So Ital, let me turn this question to you. Gary Pearson's statements that have, covered this explanation. What do you make of this? Do you have a sense of what the actual reason, or at least an understanding of what Gary Pearson is saying here?
Gary Pearson, personally speaking, I find him to be a hypocrite because everything that he says, you have to look at the opposite. His actions, you have to judge him on his actions, not on his words. So, personally speaking, you cannot do that. And personally speaking, the man is a hypocrite. Straight, plain and simple. The message you just mentioned from that lady right there speaks to the heart of the matter. And to the notion of whether, the DJs who were let go were not on board with the efforts to, I guess, correct the allegations of racism and sexism, was that something that was made clear to you? No, that's utter hogwash what he's saying, because with racism at KDHX, it's been an ongoing issue since 2019. It stopped me from volunteering and spending my money. I was a donor. From when I first came here to St. Louis, 2008, I was financially supporting that radio station. It stopped in 2019 amidst charges of racism. 4 years later, those same situations haven't changed. The people responsible for the actions, they're still in place carrying on the same thing. Now the question is, they're not thinking about me, the volunteer. They put me in a vulnerable. All volunteers now that are at KDHX or were at KDHX, especially with the fund drive now, are in a vulnerable position. With all what's happened, how can you physically stand in front of a microphone and ask somebody to send in money to support what you're doing and trying to destroy the community? That does make sense.
Mm-hmm. And we received a number of messages from supporters and donors who like the email I read mentioned specific DJs who were fired and said that was it for me, or others who, have been wrestling with this, and people who had, included the station in their estate planning, had donated cars. What are you, this seems to be such a painful decision for these supporters because for such a long time they have seen the results of their support in these programs. What are you hearing from, those supporters who are now wrestling with, do I continue to put my resources into this station?
They're broken-hearted. They're caught between crossroads. They really want to donate. They love KDHX.
Right. And a lot of people, I think, feel that way. And we have Jorge calling in from St. Louis. Jorge, welcome to St. Louis on the Air. What question or comment do you have about the issue today?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been listening and watching the events unfold, and I'm really heartbroken as a music fan, as a musician myself. I moved here, and KDHX is one of the things I really loved about St. Louis. And it's really disheartening to see a community radio station alienate itself from the community they claim to represent.
Thank you, Jorge, for those thoughts. And Jeremy, I'm curious, to his point that KDHX is unique in a lot of ways, and a lot of people mention it when they talk about what makes St. Louis special. Is that something that you've been hearing? What is unique about the KDHX that people have gotten to know, and has it lost that uniqueness in this recent development?
there's not a lot of radio stations on the dial where you can look through the schedule and say, hey, this person's been doing this show for 20 years. This person's been doing this show for 30 years. This person's been doing this show for 15 years. Radio is a personal medium. People have routines. They get used to hearing that same voice every Friday night or every Sunday morning, and you develop a personal relationship with people on the air. So, a lot of people are, the broken heart has been kind of the emblem here. And I don't think station management or DJs would say that they're very happy with what's going on right now. The question is, where are we going to end up? And, what is that end point that we're going to try to get to? I think from the DJ's point of view, they would say we want to see more representation on the board. We want to have more say in how the station is run. And station management would be saying, hey, we've got this great dynamic vision to move forward as a community pillar, but we can't have people every step of the way complaining about it and raising hackles and trying to slow down what we're trying to do.
Yes, please.
Could I interject? Thank you for that. You bring up a situation. I want to mention what came to mind is the reason KDHX is invisible in the community. Recently, Music at the Intersection, right underneath our nose on Washington Avenue, and we were invisible. Local artists that love and support KDHX, touring artists that want to come here and perform for our community. We're invisible. Our current management is making us invisible.
That's a great point, Ital. And we have another caller on the line. We have Monica calling in from Imperial, Missouri. Monica, welcome to St. Louis on the Air. What comments or questions do you have about KDHX?
Well, two things I noticed was the study that the management cited, the sound, whatever. It seems as if KDHX was doing all of the things. They're reaching the community. They're a part of the community. They're diverse. I don't understand how one affects the other with management's actions. And the other thing is management keeps saying they have a bold new plan. They're going in a new direction. And they've never said what the direction is, what actions they plan on taking other than firing all of the DJs who've been there forever. But there's they don't say anything about what they're actually trying to do or are going to do to reach out to the community.
Thank you, Monica, for that thought. Jeremy, does she have a point? Is there a little bit of confusion of what this plan actually is going forward?
I think there weren't a ton of specifics in the announcement Friday in terms of there were some declarations of intent that we want KDHX to be a facilitator between other organizations, bring people together, help move the music scene forward. I think a lot of KDH supporters might suggest that is the role the station has had historically in the community. So there's different ways to look at this.
Right. And, Jeremy, we were talking about Gary Pearson a bit already about his statements, and you had a chance to interview him this morning, both to ask him about the firings, but also to Monica's point, what is the plan going forward? How do they go forward without these DJs? And what Gary Pearson says is there are actually plenty of new DJs lining up to be part of this station.
Since Friday, we have gotten 18 new applicants to be DJs come to the station. And that brings us to over 40, I'm not sure the total, I think it's 48 or something, since about a month ago when we opened up an application online. So, of course, it's, when things end, and it's been going on a long time, there can be a sadness to that, but I am very excited about the enthusiasm and the energy for people who want to join this mission and want to be on the radio at KDHX. If some people have chosen that they don't want to, that's okay too. We can celebrate that. We can feel sad about that. But we can also celebrate the fact that other people want to join the station and be on the radio.
That was KDHX board president, Gary Pearson, speaking with our own Jeremy Goodwin this morning. Ital, I could notice you shaking your head and laughing a little bit as he describes all of the DJs coming in to replace the DJs who've resigned or were fired. What's your reaction to his statement here?
It's laughable. It's actually laughable. Right now, if you turn on the radio to 88.1, you'll probably get a little dose of what I called and coined robot radio.
What does that mean?
Radio without a human being behind it. Especially at KDHX, you're supposed to have music. It's the presenter, the announcer, the volunteer that makes a difference. That's the connection that was previously described by Jeremy.
Yeah, and I think a lot of folks are feeling that loss. And we have Gregory from Bremerton, Washington, who's on the line. Gregory, tell us what's your opinion here?
Well, I've been following things here, and it is disheartening. There are tears across the country, not just in St. Louis over this.
Thank you.
And we really feel bad for the DJs because we've seen since 2019 racist accusations and sexual assault accusations against current management. And it seems as though it's almost projecting onto the DJs what they are themselves. And the caller from Imperial was right. Mm-hmm. Just like Gary Pearson just said, we have a mission. We have all these people who are excited about a mission. What is the mission?
All right. Thank you, Gregory. And that question, what is the mission? That was really something that was on the subject matter for a meeting that took place last night. And I'm glad that you brought that up, Gregory, because that meeting of the associates, the volunteers, of which there are around, Jeremy, correct me, is there 80 volunteers? Is that
80 DJs,
80
and
DJs.
Then there are volunteers who aren't on the air. It brings it to maybe about 130 people who would say they're volunteers.
Yeah, and so this is a significant core of the work, the people who make this station work. They came together at that meeting last night. Jeremy, what did you see there, and what was being discussed? Or were there any demands made or plans settled at that meeting?
It was a meeting of about 50 of, they're called associate members, the volunteers who are on the air and off the air, and they took votes to remove 2 board members and to install 3 new board members. The question is, what legal validity do those votes have? Management, Gary Pearson was there briefly to say that we don't recognize this as a legal meeting. This is not following the bylaws. He said that a special meeting that's held to replace board members should be led by the board president, and I am not in charge of this meeting, so this doesn't count, essentially. Some of the volunteers said to me that we believe we're following the rules, and we're going to take this to court, and we think we can file a lawsuit that will compel the board to seat these new people that we've elected.
And Ital, what was your takeaway from the meeting last night, even as Jeremy said, Gary Pearson, who we just listened to, the board president, showed up basically enough to say nothing that happens at this meeting counts. What did happen there?
Well, exactly as Jeremy described. I mean, he came in with his attorney and acted like a bully, saying that his attorney was not on the list, but he thought that he had the intention and the impression that he could break the rules and walk his attorney into the meeting and control everything. So this is not Russia. This is St. Louis, America. It's not Vladimir Putin. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and Ital, that's a great point. And we actually have one of your former colleagues now on the line. We have Tom Paparay on the line. Welcome to St. Louis on the Air, Tom.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood,
yes, sir.
Notwithstanding what's going on at KDHX.
Tom, we have just a couple minutes left. Just briefly, what do you want folks to know, and what's your take on what's just happened in the last couple days?
Well, I was very proud to be with KDHX. It was the absolute repudiation of racism and sexism by the people that worked there. I found it astoundingly slanderous and defaming to claim that by management and Mr. Pierce. And it was, the irony is that that same accusation has been made and attributed to both to management at KDHX, meaning Miss Kelly Wells.
Right. Tom, and you bring up a great point that these, the statements that the management is making, a lot of it is bouncing back. A lot of this is the same discussion that's been happening at this station since 2019, and it is still unresolved. So thank you, Tom, for calling in here.
Dan, some of the complaints last night were, in fact, that, hey, the station has outlined some diversity, equity, inclusion goals and not done what it said it is setting out to do. So on the one hand, it is absolutely true that management has revised all of its policies. That was a thorough process of examining for DEI purposes, but some volunteers are saying, actually, we want to go further, and they're not necessarily backing up the words with action.
Jeremy Goodwin is St. Louis Public Radio's arts and culture reporter, and yes, his coverage has been really critical to understanding this, and if you want to know more about it, I would read his piece. And Ital K, former DJ at KDHX. Folks can still listen to you online at English Pound Radio. Thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
St. Louis on the Air proudly supports local artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.